Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Signal's Continuous Identity Sessions, where we connect the brightest minds in identity with the strategies and real world approaches that makes IAM work better. I continue to be your host and still curious technology, security, and even identity nerd, Dustin Avol. And we continue to sit down with people who are building and managing identity at enterprise scale, folks that are figuring out how to actually improve security without slowing down businesses and even innovating to the point of dynamic acceleration to support these businesses. And if you're joining us live, thank you or demand, but only the live folks will be able to use the Q&A panel so we can tackle as many questions towards the end of the show as you have. If we can't get to all of them, we'll follow up personally if we don't have time today. But let's get to today's episode 3. The topic is really around the inflection point that we're at in IAM. Organizations have been wrestling with cost and complexity of legacy IAM for a while, but it's about cleaning out up the past and focusing on the future without having to really start over. And that tension between AI and faster results is why we're here. So to explore this shift today, I'm joined by Darran Rolls, self-proclaimed identity and security dude and former CTO and CISO at SailPoint, as well as a longtime thought leader in identity security. Currently, Darran is a CTO and the founder of Identity Innovation Labs, a company dedicated to forward-looking strategies in IAM. His work focuses and has focused on identity controls spanning from traditional governance and an IGA to dynamic real-time policy solutions, which is really where we'll focus today. Darran, he's a thought leader. He talks about AI and the emergence of agent identity that we'll touch on. He's mentioned and advocated for a shift to a shared identity control plane to help orchestrate controls across legacy, current, and even into the future system. So together, I hope we'll unpack some of that around how organizations can move beyond legacy architectures toward a fabric designed for today's real-time enterprise. Thanks for joining us, Darran. Let me take a breath.
Awesome. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for that introduction. Certainly been in this space for a long time. I'm always a bit cautious of the term thought leader myself because I believe in a beginner's mindset. It's the place to be.
That.
I always feel like I'm a beginner here. Don't be the expert. An X is a has-been, and a spurt is a drop of water under pressure. So let's not be that. Let's be beginners, right? Which I love.
Well, where are you? Where are you today? Where are you joining us from?
I'm actually in very southern tip of Washington State. I'm actually, that view behind me is the view out from my place here in a little village called White Salmon in southern Washington State.
Great. Thank you for dialing in. We love having you here. And I will try my best as well to approach this with a beginner's mindset, the empty cup, as I've heard it described as well. But you've been in the identity space for a while now. Let's not. We don't have to talk about time frame, and I'm sure you've seen organizations invest substantially in governance platforms. We mentioned SailPoint. There's others. A large acquisition that's underway now with Palo Alto taking CyberArk. Okta's in the mix, and then, of course there's others. We continue to hear from customers that static provisioning of access just isn't doing the job. It's maybe not secure enough anymore. I'm curious if you're hearing something similar and what's driving this shift towards more real-time authorization requirements.
Well, I think if you're a bit of an OG like I am in this space, you tend to sort of see this thing as cyclic anyway. And I think we've been on a journey. I mean, my career is almost that journey. I sort of came in with the very first part of really automation with an acquisition into Tivoli into the user administration space there, and then added workflow and more of a dynamic business process thought to it when we created Waveset Technologies, which was acquired into Sun Microsystems in 2004. And then, as you mentioned, I did a long stint at SailPoint, ending in 2020. Love the guys there, love what we did, and really were the sort of the founders of IGA as it stood. And I think that journey hasn't ended. We are still very much trying to achieve use cases almost that we wrote on a whiteboard at the start of that journey around basic administration, cleanliness, and we're still in that process. But I think what I hear most of all, and this was my topic coming out of SailPoint when I was kind of free to say what I chose, is that it's got to cost less, right? It's got to be more impactful, and it's got to happen faster. And I think that's been true over the last 5 years. And there's a certain element of fatigue, I think, in traditional identity approaches, and rightly so, right? I mean, you've got to keep, and I want to talk about that a little bit, about this idea that IGA is dead, but long live IGA. And I think it's true, but I think the focus why am I here? Because you guys are representing at the moment what I think of as being the forward approach to bringing real-time context to the existing infrastructure in a way that's deployable. So yeah, I hear what you do. It's very prevalent.
And so when you're working with clients or speaking with other, industry experts, where are the areas that they're realizing that current approach has gaps and needs more real-time decisions? Is it in the cost and the items you mentioned before, or are there clear use cases that the static approach just isn't solving for?
Yeah, there are definite clear, and I think of them as augmentation use cases, and we should get into some of that detail, because I think from a methodology perspective, you have to leverage what you've already got. I don't think it's a tenable business proposition to come back to leadership today, having spent for me as an advocate for traditional identity management, to come back and say, oh yeah, no, we just need another 30 million. I mean, that's insane, nor is it correct. But we do need a more contextual and continuous, and I want to again come back to your notions of continuous capability, but it has to be in the mix. It's not to replace the mix, because you'd mentioned one of the sort of stump theories I have around this being a tiered infrastructure, a tiered thing. I think the legacy things that we do for those legacy systems, they're not going away. I mean, the mainframe is still here. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years and telling people, oh, mainframe's going away. You know what? It's still here. And what we learn from that is the long tail, which is obvious. And the identity infrastructure itself has a long tail. And rightly so. Some of the static system things that are only episodic and manageable through traditional provisioning profile management paths don't go away. They stay where they are. But I need to make, not just because of the adversary, the guy in his hoodie and all that jazz, but we have to make more contextual decisions that are really hard to do. We need to make meta policy decisions based on metadata, and overlay them, augment them into the current process. And I think there's some killer use cases for it. And I've got my methodology for that is just do the easy stuff, and I could give you some examples of that. So yeah, and I think that what I would caution, maybe it's the OG thing, is that we just not to be too evangelical about this move from the old to the new, because it is a progression. Like I say, I remember sitting down in front with a hierarchical database specialist I was at the Bank of England at the time, bringing in DRS 6000 systems and sitting there and saying, well, we're going to do this. And he's like, yeah, we already do it. Oh, we're going to do this. And you go, yeah, we already do that. That what we're really doing is a repeating pattern of what's partially there. So, I would sort of come back to, I hope everybody is listening now, listen to the previous 2 episodes, and I wanted to pick up a little bit on some of the things that Ian said, very intuitively around anti-patterns for continuous, like if you're looking for something, and he'd mentioned, anything that has human in the loop, that might be an anti-pattern for continuous. I would say agree with that. The human in the loop has moved really to be a learning process. I mean, it's reinforcement learning. That's what the human's doing right now. But we've still got this person called a requester. We've still got this person who wants to do something, and they are in that loop. So again, it sort of ties into the idea, how could we get a better request process based on continuous contextual identity? How could we make that fulfilling provisioning authorization more contextual, more real, more and so I think that's one good example of use cases that we can pick up on that leverage the old world, as it were, if that makes sense.
Going deeper into that sort of old world, are there still, it sounds like there still are some examples where traditional provisioning still makes sense. Is that, am I picking up on that right? And if so, kind of what does look like?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I like to be provocative, right? So I'm going to say IGA is dead. Traditional IGA, as I can help, I help define it, right? As we defined it then, is dead, but long live IGA. The principles of good understanding of desired state, of clean administration, if you don't manage it, the bad guys will, don't change. This idea of business being involved in the loop and taking responsibility for things, I just think we let it run a little wild. We let it go a little bit too. And if you look at what, and I'm an IGA guy, right? I'm an authorization guy, put it like that. I love authorization and entitlement. But what we've done really is we've moved too far away from what we were trying to achieve. We've allowed audit and controls and bits of the business to be the driver, because that's where we got funding. And what we tend to do now is articulate the 32 apps we're going after, and then the 62 apps, and then we tier out our deployment profiles around that stuff. And that's what we do. We don't look more broadly. And I think when identity is part of security, it's soup to nuts, and you have to sort of rethink program a little bit, and you have to think in terms of, because all the things I've just described there, the 32 SOX apps that we know, they are the known things, right? They're also the things that the adversary is probably not chasing, right? I mean, it is. If you're going to break in, you don't go where the headlights are and the locked door. You go to the back door they left open.
In the shadows.
Right. Exactly. And so, so that's a little bit of a program oriented thing. That doesn't mean you stop doing those large apps. And again, I think your IGA programs are locked in and will continue. And so this is why I think the approach that you guys take is so potentially transformational, is let's make those processes better. Let's augment them. And let's move with more context and with real-time decision makers. Let's face it, again, I'll talk IGA. It's an episodic process, administration. It's an episodic, time-based, reconciliation-oriented thing. But we now have the capability to bring metadata to bear, to make meta decisions much closer to real time in the process, in the administration, outside of the administration time. And that has to be, we have to overlay those things. And I don't think today you can get that from the existing infrastructure. It's already locked, or the existing project, right? I mean, it's locked in.
Well, we've, you've mentioned the business driving, asking for faster results. You talked a little bit about the shadows and those areas of potential threat. We've gone almost 15 minutes, and it's time to at least mention these AI enabled strategies as well. So whoever had the 15-minute mark on the bingo card, go collect. But not only did we talk with Ian about the continuity and the context and those 5 piano keys, as he calls, and you're talking about these protected apps, but with Felix, last time we talked a little bit about identity fabric. And so if we wrap in that, how do you see the pressure that organizations drive around IAM and the boards that are asking for faster results in an AI-enabled world and all these different pieces? How does that require more, or does it require more of a move towards a policy fabric that can then deliver those real-time outcomes more?
Yeah, It's no wonder the board's asking for it, right? I mean, I think most businesses look at it and say, you've been doing identity for 10 years, and you have to try and say, yes, that bigger. It's not a project, it's a process, and it doesn't ever change. It's going to continue as we continue on our journey. It's a tough call going back and asking for more money, that's for sure.
Yep.
But that's just how it is. But again, I sort of, maybe it's the OG in me. I want to put AI and all of the things that we have to do to not mess up, because let's face it, I mean, I look at it now and I'm a bit like, oh gosh, we're making all the same mistakes we made before. We're rushing at it. We're not thinking through the models. We're not thinking through the desired state. We're rushing at MCP servers, and we don't have models for these things. So that is a cautionary note. However, it's coming. And I think it's really exciting, and there's some really cool things you can do. But I think, again, it fits in with, so I've got this sort of meta model that I've blogged about a little bit, which is this idea that the traditional path of identity, with its seeking the known, with its funded path that it's on, with its big mission for big apps, continues and doesn't change, because those systems, people say, oh, well, it'll just be an agent. You won't be. I'm not sure about that. You're not going to give up administering Salesforce. You go, because if you don't manage the profiles in Salesforce, some of the bad guys will. So I think that tier continues. I think there's this new emerged tier that if you're writing an app today, there's no reason not to externalize the authorization. Why wouldn't you do that? It doesn't make sense. The reason you wouldn't would be political or technology infrastructure. I've been a big fan of externalized auth forever. I dabbled on the XACML spec for a while. I'm intrigued by all Zen and other things. And I think its time has come, because we are rewriting things. AI is the opportunity to rewrite things, in effect. So I think it's a much bigger part of the infrastructure now, and it is the future in that respect. So if you've externalized the authorization to a policy with a policy decision, you're not going to dump that piece of infrastructure back on the left, right? Back over on, it's not going to turn into a static profile that has to be managed. So gosh, you've got to better add it to my IGA program. It's not going to need it. But the policies and the data on which those policies are based are the same thing, right? If I externalize a decision, if I make the decision static and put it in a profile and manage it with IGA, good job. If I make that decision at runtime based on verifiable attributes and a policy, good job. But it's still got to be owned by the business. Somebody inside, this is the human in the loop. The human is still responsible. I still go to jail as the CISO, right? So again, that's that second tier. And I'll paint these three together here in a second. And then the third tier is obviously what we're doing in agentic. And I think there's lots of paths for that. Obviously, MCP, and you guys have been on the forefront of that, which I love. In terms of it being a gateway process, functioning. Ian talks about it functioning a bit like an API gateway, which is cool. Love all that. But I don't think we're really set how that model's going to be yet. But I can guarantee you of one thing. You've got to know who should, who can, and who does. And who did, more importantly, right? Agent, whoever. And we've made the agent thing much more complicated, because we've now got a run as user, we've got a proxy user, an owner user. So the model's more complicated over there. So you've got these three tiers: traditional profile management, contextual authorization, externalized authorization, and a reflection of both of those that we're going to do over in the future. And I think as an organization, we have to do all three. You can't just walk away from them. And I think the connected tissue of all three of those becomes an extension of the middle, if that makes sense, of policy and attributes. I'm a big verifiable attributes fan. I'm a big ontology fan, semantic web and ontology. I think we have an opportunity, if we don't forget that the policy and the attributes are the access still, we have a chance to overlay those two features on top of the legacy provisioning, episodic provisioning world.
And also looking forward into the agentic world.
Exactly. So, if I had to place a bet, it's going to be on, people say, "Oh, the data is king," and I do believe that the data is the new oil. I think contextual policies based on verifiable attributes are the new oil. That's a hell of a mouthful, but
yeah, but there's a good quote for social or for a headline, right? Yeah. Okay, so policy models, orchestration, these different enforcement points in real time, where decisions need to be made. As a customer or a practitioner, where do I start? Like, what components do I attack first?
well, I think the meta message is augment and overlay, right? Number one.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one for me would be just choose the easy stuff. There is easy stuff. The easy stuff is always easy. And we as practitioners and thinkers in this space tend to want, say 80-20. We're not really happy if we haven't got a story for the 20. And right now, I'd be happy not to have a story for the 20 because there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle that is instant add value, sort of forcing use cases. And it's one I know that you guys talk a lot about, the duty roster example. Who would have thought it's that hard to make a workload decision about access with all this infrastructure that we have? But it is. I mean, let's face it, I've seen it. You can overlay Signal to a duty roster like situation where it's taking into open ticket context. You can do it easily. That's like a POC use case,
Yeah.
So my advice is always to say, find some easy use cases that hit. But okay. So take a step back. If it's something that can prevent a giant, great project being kicked off, because I know how this goes. Someone's go, yeah, we got to do G-Ross thing. It's a privilege, and so you get the CyberArk team get involved, and then you got the SailPoint team because they're trying. Those two people don't ever talk to each other anyway, right? They certainly sure as hell don't share data. I mean, that's just a fact. I tried to create a standard for that, and it never worked. I mean, like still today, really, the IGA system doesn't understand what's truly in the privilege vault. And you're like, what? But that's it. So try and get that. Oh my goodness, no! You could just drop this piece in. It will matter because I think one of the things that I'm intrigued with is this. Like I say, when I say metadata, I think what I mean is the graph of interesting data that is meta, that is pulled in from multiple sources, that is augmented, and then is used as a backbone for making finer grained decisions. That's the future architecture, right? And I think anyone who's listening to this who's an IGA person historically, I would say, do you recognize that? Because that's what IGA itself is. It doesn't change the authorization model in the systems that it connects to. It collects metadata, right? From HR and from this place and that place and wherever it is, and folds it all together and manages profiles. It's a meta layer that sits on top of the underlying authorization systems. And unfortunately, I think core IGA has become underlying fabric for most projects. I'm not saying it's its destiny or it will always be that way, but today in most projects, that's what it is. It's sort of rigid. It's sort of, like I say, not as integrated as we like. And I just think that's a killer use case for taking, I don't want to make it all about Signal, but for, products like Signal. Unfortunately, there's not many others, but,
well, let's take it from the vendor side. It seems like vendors themselves push towards platform consolidation. And it can be at odds with some of the security leaders trying to balance consolidation for simplicity, trying to then maintain that innovation. So how do these security leaders, in organizations balance those considerations where they need the innovation and real-time enforcement, but with consolidation that the vendors are pushing?
Well, I get that, right? No one wants another contract. No one wants another, SaaS contract to deal with, let alone another vendor with a dedicated team and training. And I get all that. So it makes some business sense to do consolidation. But I can tell you, identity and security is not SAP. It's not
Mm,
financials. It's very, very different. I'm personally not a big fan of aggregation in that respect. Um, not to say that the guys at Palo have done the wrong thing with their acquisition. I think that they've made a market leading statement that says security and identity are connected at the hip, right?
hmm
Amen. Amen. I mean, I've been singing that song forever, so I love it. But I think that you've now just got a bigger thing to deal with. I would prefer a use case, and I shan't mention the gentleman. There's a friend of mine who works at a large, well, an acquaintance of mine who works at a large bank in the UK, based in the UK, has an architecture which is sort of like no, in your box. It's like a no architecture. It sort of goes, I get you can do that, but no, that you, Mr. Vendor, you do this thing. I want you to do this thing. And I want you to play with these other things. And I think that's much more of a model for the future. And if you're lucky enough that the real-time contextual privileged access that you get from the vendor that gave you some other part of that puzzle happens to be the same, but almost don't do it because they got it. Keep the use cases isolated. Look for
mm,
I'm a best of breed believer in that respect.
yeah.
And the argument against it is, oh, I've got to integrate it all together. And I just don't think that's the case anymore. I think things like
Mm.
shared signals framework, um,
Standards.
yeah, standards, um, maturity. The systems are just much more mature now.
Hmm.
Even the oldest legacy dogged version of an IAM, IGA platform you can possibly imagine. I shan't mention which vendor it comes from because I'd get in trouble. But, it don't do much. It doesn't usually win the RFP. It doesn't, when it's an IGA, it's there. Most people have already got it, so they want it. It has a contextual API now, a use case specific API, and it will support Cape SSF.
Hmm.
So I think that the game has changed. My little meta architecture, which incidentally, if you go to my blog at identityinnovationlabs.com, and I've got a blog on this where I draw this picture because I hate waving my arms
Hmm.
around. Um, but the three tiers that we talked about, the two things that sit above it are verifiable attributes and contextual metadata, policies, and by that contextual metadata is verifiable attributes, and an action-oriented ontology, and that's what I hope the folks in SSF will profile fully next. If we can take sets of, in effect, structured use cases, just like we've done with Kate, right?
Hmm.
Global logout. I said that to somebody the other day who doesn't know about it. They go, yeah, we can already do that. I go, no, you can't. No. But without Kate, there is no universal global sign out. They go, what? It's true. But we've got to very quickly get down that ontological route of sort of understanding items like entitlements, which I love, right? This thing called an entitlement, and it having
Hmm.
use cases that you can talk to. What are you? What do you relate to? What is your risk score? Can I provision you? Ways of talking to meta objects within this system. Oh gosh, we're getting down it now. But I think that's an architecture that you can build that isn't vendor specific.
Well, so to bring us back up a little bit, it sounds like if I can summarize it, you're saying there are uh, situations where static provisioning, sort of the OG approach, can maintain, and then using sort of a composable architecture, which is how Felix described it. I think of it as Lego blocks for, and you mentioned best of breed for different opportunities, and connecting them with some sort of fabric or orchestration layer to be able to take real time decisions, make real time decisions where it works is kind of the best of everything, right? Maintain this approach for everything all in instead of with these disconnected systems that don't share data and folks don't talk to one another.
Right. Yeah. I think that's about it. That's the current state of play, particularly with what we know is coming in AI. We can see it, we can feel it, right? One
Yeah.
thing I'm
So
always amazed by is that the people like us that deal with this all the time, we're still amazed that AI can do it. We go, "Oh my God, it can do this." And
yeah,
my
right.
wife's a non-technical person. She's like, "I don't understand why you people are so surprised." Yeah, well, surely isn't that what you expected it to do? Which is true, but it's coming and it changes things. But I think you painted the right picture. The past doesn't go away,
Yeah.
and I think the focus. I was going to write a blog post about this, and it was policy is the thermopylae of IGA. And I didn't want to do it because I've got so many friends over there. But I do think that, like I said, policy around verifiable attributes has the ability to deliver everything that we wanted IGA to do for us.
Hmm.
And
Well,
that's really something to think about.
we will in the recordings and the on demand. We'll be sure to attach some of those resources, those blogs via the platform,
Oh,
so
cool.
folks can check them out. I wanted to sort of touch more on the AI component and the agents and another blog of yours, because we are seeing that AI is reshaping and shaping every corner of the enterprise, especially in identity, and the potential is huge from real-time anomaly detection to policy recommendations to all sorts of areas. And I'm curious how you see AI and IAM augmenting one another, especially in the way that policies stack up today and where it still feels more aspirational.
Yeah, I think that the and to come back to Ian's anti-patterns, this is why I don't think it's an anti-pattern to say that continuous is human in the loop. I know what he meant by that, and folks should go back and listen for sure, because he's really saying if you've got a process that stops dead while you wait for a
Mm-hmm.
human, um,
Not continuous.
I think you're right, but I think that the human is most definitely in the loop here. Maybe it's more on the ISV side today, but I think it will be in the program sense, because we are creating these huge data repos now. And most large programs are taking this job on themselves to create a huge repo that they're sitting large language models and generative AI on top of, in order to get access to it. But I think what the critical thing that's happening is the human in the loop there. Reinforcement learning, um,
Mm.
is what we now do. So what you do is you put your identity specialist right in the middle of that reinforcement learning process in order to make smarter IAM decisions and context. And I'm on the advisory board of a company that does this, and it's really interesting what you can then do at the endpoint with with that context and with that power once the human has trained it. Right? We don't have to wait for it all to
Mm.
get reaggregated to a centralized platform and make sense of it. We can do things right down there in the agent. So I think it's super important. So
Yeah,
so I'd say,
well, speaking of your
sorry, okay.
agents, I wanted to bring up another one of your articles, which I enjoyed. The title, maybe the most so, is "Do Agents Dream of Electric Entitlements?" Where you're making some comparisons between these AI agents and the replicants in Blade Runner. So I'd love for you to elaborate on that point and the parallel from that post, in terms of the fit from an IAM perspective too.
Yeah, I think I'm a Philip K. Dick wrote the book that was
Yeah,
behind that, of the whole thing.
right.
It's a fascinating piece of reading. It's so relevant to what we're doing now. Is AI conscious? Do we give it rights and legal right? I'm fascinated by that piece of it all. But I think the term I use there is more human than human.
Mm.
And I think that's where we have to think of agentic, and we have to say, I'm afraid you are more human than human. By that I mean all of the controls and the vulnerabilities that we accredit to humans will be more so for agent, um, because the model is more complicated and it happens really quickly. If ever you've had a hallucination from a language
Yeah.
model, it's kind of scary. I was doing some research the other day, and it made up an entire thesis, and I went, "Wow, this is amazing!" Oh, sorry, I made that up.
Yeah.
Like, what? You made it up? So we have to be cautious, and Lord be that it's making up the policy. So, you've got to be very conscious and cognizant of what it is. So more human than human. Let's come back to that. So I think you've got to overlay the sorts of things we thought of for humans and do them in real time. And that absolutely means real time decision making. I don't see how you can think about an AI model that doesn't have externalized authorization and contextuous, continuous evaluation of authorization. I've used a whole bunch of blur words there that kind of point to what you guys do.
We've talked about the 3 C's here before: contextual, consistent, and continuous identity. Right. It sounds like you're saying that's essential in the agentic IAM world as well, right?
In fact, more human than human. Right?
More
so. More so. Because it's going to make decisions faster, and if they're wrong, it will propagate them. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'd love to publish. I might actually publish the theory that it did out. It's a theory of consciousness and time. It's really deep, but I was just like, wow. And it will do that, right? If you don't have the right decision making process involved in it, it will run away. So I think if for no other reason. So if I was running a big identity program right now, what I would do is I would be taking a continuous contextual authorization engine. I would be overlaying it on top of the legacy IAM stuff to sort of pay for it, if you like. Yeah. Like I say, there's some simple use cases you can do, and then I'd be baking it in and I would be becoming an expert in it. And it's an interesting thing because I'm involved in a little services company in the UK, Cyber IAM. They're really smart guys and everything else. And as those guys have been, what is our place in the new AI world? Does application onboarding by the machine mean I don't have a job anymore? And the truth is, it's like, no, because you need a higher level thinking, identity centric, controls oriented brain in the loop for the policies that will be embedded in the control model for the AI. And I think the future of identity management services is in this sort of union of Venns between the traditional platforms, because they're going that way as well. The absolute standalone AI that people are doing, it's got nothing to do with identity. They're trying to chat to a client faster. I don't know, whatever they're trying to do. But the Venn is in the middle. It's where the IAM infrastructure, the controls and responsibility platform interacts with the agent tree is that. That's where I think identity management services is going to be in the future. Because, like I said, more human than human. And then, sorry, while I'm on this giant rant, let me just close the thought from that. I think that the other problem is the model there is more complicated. Like, we did a great job with Gen 1, Gen 2 IGA, right? Persona came along, blew it all up. Yep. Basically, it was like, oh, but Darren's a student and a teacher and and oh dear, the model collapsed because we didn't think through that persona element. There's a little bit of that going on right now with agentic, which kind of concerns me, to be honest with you. It's like this thing I have to own it because it's running on my space and it's there for my company. It has to have a set of proxy accounts. It's a set of MCP tool permissions in order to do its job. And then when it's ready, it talks on the behalf of Darran. That's 3 personas in one.
Yeah.
Not one. So more human than human, right? That's intriguing.
And you've been saying IGA is dead, long live IGA. And it feels like there's some of that in the agentic world as well, right?
Absolutely. Someone's got to take responsibility. This is the thing, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how much complex AI you create or deploy, a human is still responsible for it. For now, right? For the next while, at least. So, yeah, I think that, that notion of business, we're kind of losing it a little bit. We're sinking down into the techie, which is what happens, right? I mean, who the heck can understand a Salesforce entitlement model? I mean, I look at it still and I go, are you kidding? It's technical, and that drove us technical. And I think that IGA helped us pop up a little bit and take, what is an entitlement? It's a nicely named bag of meta around some access, right? we did a good job of that. And I just hope, again, I think long live, because somebody has to sit in that paradigm with that mindset that is business responsibility, controls, desired state against actual. That doesn't actually go away. I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been great, but before we close, Darran, getting back to some of the practicality, if there's a CIO or a CISO looking to make the first step towards this version of IAM, should they start in externalizing policy? Should they start in observability and in real-time access? And where would you recommend that they start? How do we get going?
I'm a big fan of observability. Like I say, I'm on the board with a company that does it, Orchid Security. I just think that observability is you can't manage what you don't see. Always felt that. And that doesn't mean slurping through logs often. So I think observability is key. You can't not do that, but let's just park that for the time being. I think it's that meta architecture that we talked about is you have to introduce this approach and this technology into your architecture. Don't wait till that project has finished, because ultimately we fund these things for 3 years. People get jobs and they lose jobs based on these projects, right? That's how it works, right? It's 3 year, 5 year. Introduce it. And I know perhaps it means a budgetary shift, but pare back some. I think you could overlay some of the use cases that you're trying to extend IGA for, and you're trying to extend PAM for, and you're trying to extend access management for. I think you can nibble those back a little bit and create enough room to do a use case. That's where I would start here, because I think you have to. Don't wait.
Well, and the overlay approach is how you can avoid ripping out some of this old stuff and just, like you said, nibble in at edges based on new use cases.
Yeah, you're not. When Tom Bravo invested in SailPoint and then took us public and everything else, one of the things that one of their guys said to me, which has always stuck with me, and they went, "Man, this stuff's sticky, isn't it?" It's super sticky. To believe you're going to take it, rip it out, not have, because let's just not administer our core SOX apps anymore. Then, I mean, and you can't stick this in as its total replacement. So it's a right. I think from a vendor, it's a sell with, and that's kind of what we do at IAL, Identity Innovation Labs. Really, is help our customers and clients, and some of them are investors, and some of them are companies, sort of live this ecosystem world that we're now in. Paint yourself as part of a meaningful ecosystem that includes the existing solutions, and run alongside. And I think rapid deployment is a big part of that. And I think products like Signal do show that. So good reason to invest and move forward. And again, I think my closing thought on that is just don't wait, because AI is not waiting. Right. If it's an investment question, just go look at how much money is being plowed into the infrastructure. We're in an investment time. We're not in a save money time in our history. It's a time to invest and move forward or be left behind.
Yeah, great stuff, Darran. As we wrap up here, a couple of quick hits. Where can we find you in the real world, in the identity and security real world, in the next coming months through the end of the year? Will you be at events speaking, etc.?
I tend to go to a number of I'm always at Identiverse. Like Ian, I think I've missed one since it was Cloud Identity Summit in Keister in Colorado. I always love going to that event because, man, that's geek out fest for me. I love it. I'm actually in beginning of October, going to be at SailPoint Navigate because I've got a couple of companies that sit in and around that space.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
Really good. See you there, and you guys will be there as well. And then and then there's a couple of events in the fall which lose me now, but yeah, I love being in and around that. I've just done an interesting podcast. Just done a session with the Identity Center guys. I love that podcast. Always listen myself. So that's coming out, I think, in a week or two's time. And then, I'm much busier now. Like when I retired from SailPoint in 2020, I said to myself, oh, maybe I'm done. And then I've realized I just love this space too much. So I'm sort of ramping up, if you like. I've got lots of really interesting things I want to get out there about AI and consciousness, because it's a big thing for me at the moment. And it's an extension from what we're talking. So, my site and my blog, and just, be out there a bit. So as much as people have me.
Yeah. Once again, it's Identity Innovation Lab. I think you might have answered this throughout our conversation, but I want to just sort of pull it in tightly and ask you the question. If someone is watching this session and could only implement one thing, either next week or next month, what would you tell them to focus on?
Do you mean from a classic Signal use case or generally?
Just generally from our conversation throughout this talk for the last 45 minutes or so, and someone said, this is super interesting, I just don't know where to start. What would one thing that they could do? What would that be?
I think if you're a big end organization, start what you might call next generation identity architecture project that doesn't flush everything away. It learns how to overlay these things together. And I think if you wanted to do something super easy, I would augment some of the decision-making processes that are currently made in IGA and put them in Signal. And add all this context to it. Host state, ticket state, all this stuff. And, make better, tighter contextual decisions. I would look at those standards piece, because I think that's a big, I think Signal talking to SailPoint over SSF channels is really interesting. But they all sound rather academic, right? Rather than project oriented. But
we appreciate it, and that's why I wanted to get to the project oriented, the action based of where to start. So
I say start building that meta repo. Start building that meta repo of context. Start defining and understanding and owning verifiable attributes, and start the journey of understanding what policy means and how it's going to control so much of the future.
Appreciate it. And finally, Darran, in the interest of continuity, continuousness, if that's a real word, we like to ask a question at the end of each show around something, could be a skill or a hobby or something that you've been continuously engaged in or doing. It sounds like even in retirement, you're especially busy, which I would say maybe you didn't retire, right? Or maybe you didn't retire, but
I don't use that word anymore.
Yeah. What is something that you continuously do, or you continuously are trying?
I'm continuously inquisitive. That's something I can't get away from. I think my friend, longtime colleague, Colin Perry over at PwC always calls me a double clicker. I'm a bit of a double clicker on that. But I would say that I'm here in the Columbia River Gorge because I'm a kite surfer. I love wind sports, and I get to go kite surf 3 or 4 days a week. Kite foil surf here. Man, jumping over a wave, looking at that mountain, that fills your soul. So I still do that for as long as I'm able. I shall be doing that.
Amazing. So. I love that. Well, thanks again, Darran Rolls, and thank you to everyone who joined us today and on demand. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so we'll just kind of wrap up and remind everyone that all these sessions are recorded and available at signal.ai and at our YouTube channel. And you can subscribe both places, signal.ai, get details on all the upcoming episodes. You'll also find resources like we talked about today, some of the blogs that Darran has posted under the docs link within the modal on the right of the screen, as well as any tools we may have mentioned in the follow-up email as a subscriber. And until next time, once again, thank you, Darran, and let's continuously work to keep making identity work better. I'm Dustin Avol. We'll see you next time on Continuous Identity Sessions. Thanks so much.